Hey guys, and welcome to another Mammoth Interactive tutorial in Xcode. We're using the version 8.0 and this is the beta 2 version. The language we'll be using to code our app will be Swift 3 and it will be a new Xcode project. So our project today is just going to be creating an average calculator. Now this is a simple enough task. It's just going to be a little calculator that takes in a number from a user and it recalculates the average of any previous numbers added by the user. So this is, although it's going to be a very simple concept, I'm going to get you more used to the idea of developing apps, starting with something simple, and then as these tutorials go, we'll start making harder and harder apps and implementing new features into these apps. So without further ado, let's get started. So we're going to start off by just selecting Create a New Xcode Project. This is the Xcode welcome screen, by the way. And we're going to choose under iOS applications, it's going to be a single view application. We'll click Next. Let's give this product a name. I'm just going to call this Average Calculator Tutorial. There we go. And fill in the fields as necessary. I just have my name, organization, identifier. The language we're using is Swift, and this should be under Universal Devices. We'll leave the bottom two boxes checked and the first one unchecked. If we'll click Next, now we need to choose a place to save it. I'm just going to save it under Desktop here. And I'll click Create, and this just creates our project for us. Now, for those of you who haven't watched the previous tutorials, this is our home screen. And also, I highly recommend you do watch those tutorials because we've been discussing some sort of UI elements that we'll be adding to our apps. So, our File Explorer is on the left here, and our toolbar is on the right. If we go ahead and open up some files, let's start with viewcontroller.swift. As you can see, it contains our code. It's just blank code right now, so these classes, rather these functions, are just kind of there to set everything up during the app once it loads. And so this is where we'll be adding our functionality, whereas if we go to main.storyboard, this is where we'll be designing the layout of our app. So as you can see here, or it might be kind of hard to see because of this screen, this is just kind of a blank phone emulator. I'm just going to change this to an iPhone SE just by selecting the next one down, and I'm going to zoom out a little bit so that you can see the whole simulator. Okay, so here we go. Here's our phone screen. It's just going to be a blank canvas which we can add our tools onto it. Now this process should be fairly familiar to you by now, just getting set up and everything. And so we'll choose our tools from here. Our File Explorer is on the left here, and we are ready to go. So the two files we'll be using will be the viewcontroller.swift for our code and the main.storyboard to design our layout. Now this process is going to be designing the layout first and adding all the necessary views. Then we'll implement them within the code, and then we'll implement the code functionality, and finally we'll end up by improving our design by adding in some color, improving the layout, and just making the app look nice so we have a final product that people are actually going to want to use. Alright, so this is the setup. The next part will be looking at designing the layout. Right, now we're going to design our app layout. This is going to be the first step in our app design process. So we're going to do this in the main.storyboard file, and we're going to go there and we're just going to add in the necessary views from our list of views in the bottom right hand corner. And as we do this, we're going to explain what each view will do and why we'll need it in our app. So because this is a calculator, we know we'll need at least three things. We'll need some kind of input field, we'll need a button, and then a label to display our text. But we'll see that we'll actually need a couple of elements, and I'll explain why we need those as we go. Right, so this is where we left off in the main.storyboard file. We have our phone emulator here, our tools on the right, and our File Explorer on the left. We'll leave the File Explorer open for now. I'm just going to make it as small as possible. And our phone screen, I'm going to zoom in a little bit back up to 100%. Now, as our app is going to be an average calculator, we know that we need some sort of an input, we need some sort of a display, and at least one button. So we're going to have a text input, which is going to be a text field. We're going to have a button, which will do the calculation. So if my cursor's just in the bottom right over here. So first is going to be a text field, then we're going to have a button, and then we'll have a label to display the average, and then at the very bottom we're going to have another button that's just going to reset our count. So this will ensure that we can kind of calculate an average and keep adding to it, and then once we no longer need to calculate the average of that and we want to calculate a new one, we can press this reset button and it will reset all our values to 0 again. Okay, so by now, if you've watched our tutorials, text fields, labels and buttons should all be very familiar to you, and if you haven't watched those tutorials, I strongly recommend you go and watch them. Otherwise, let's get right into designing our layout. So the first thing we'll add will be our text field. I'm just going to select it, and sometimes it needs a second. There we go. Now we can add it in. I'm just going to add it at the top here. And if we really want, we could even add in a label before that, saying something that just kind of tells us exactly what this app is all about and what we're going to do. In fact, why don't we do that now? So we'll add in this label up at the top here. And I'm just going to put it there and drag it out. These are going to be just kind of crude size guidelines. We can go into the size editor and modify them directly and precisely here, but we'll leave that to the very end when we improve our design. For now, I just kind of want to add everything to our layout. So we have our label to kind of tell us exactly what's going on. We have our text field, or rather, the text field, and then we're going to have our button. That's going to be just below there, stretching out a little. And then we're going to have our label, which will display what our average is. And again, just going to spread that out a little bit. And then at the very bottom, we'll have another button, which will be the reset button. Just going to add that in there. And now the final step in this process is just going to be going to the property or the attributes inspector, and I'm just going to change the text of each one to display something appropriate. So this one is just going to be calculate the average of numbers inputted. And we can change that to contain something better later on if we'd like. This one I'm just going to have a placeholder text. I'm just going to say something like enter number. Our button is just going to be called calculate. Our label is just going to contain the text that says something like display average. And our bottom button is just going to say something like reset. Okay, so again, not fine-tuning the layout. This is how it looks right now, but this is not going to be how our final product will look. We'll change all that at the very end. For now, I just want to get everything down on our layout so that we can add it to our viewController.swift and kind of modify the fields. Okay, so this is our layout. This next part will be dealing with actually adding these fields or these views into the code itself so that we can modify them, and then we'll look at implementing some of the functionality of the app itself. Okay, so just as a quick recap, we have our title label. This is just going to tell us exactly what the app is all about. We have an input field, which is a text field where the user will enter a number. We have a button that will perform the calculations when pressed, and we have a label to display the result of our average, and then a reset button to change everything back to 0. Okay, so that's our layout. Next part, we'll be looking at actually implementing these in the code. Okay, so now we have successfully designed our app layout. So this is a calculator, and so we knew we needed 3 things, but we added in an extra couple of things. So we added first a label as our title. We had a text field for the user input. That's going to be where the user puts in the numbers. And we're going to have a button that will perform the calculations when pressed and will display the average on a label below. And then at the very bottom we just had a reset button that's going to reset everything to 0 once we're done. So we only added in the views to our layout, to our blank canvas, and we gave them names and some text, but we'll modify them later on. So we just designed a very crude layout, and this was just kind of getting everything on our main.storyboard so that we can use it in the code. We'll fine-tune this design later and kind of make it look all pretty and everything, all that good stuff right at the very end.